Hello and welcome to another episode of Know Before You Go. My name is Father Jude McPeak, and I'm the vocation promoter for the province of St. Albert the Great. This weekend, it's the last weekend before we begin the season of Lent. The last weekend, you could say, to go out and enjoy life before we begin our prayer and our penance and our fasting. And this weekend, we get a very special treat because the gospel that we receive on Sunday is taken from Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount. The famous Sermon on the Mount, which many Christian scholars and theologians say this is the height, the culmination of Jesus' teaching. This is the core, the essential of what it means to be a Christian, certainly in the Gospel of Matthew. And the gospel that we focus on Sunday, it focuses on loving our enemies, of turning our cheek to those who strike us, of forgiving those who hurt us, of going the extra mile in the service of another. And Jesus is calling us to love our enemies, and he says, what good is it if we love those who love us? Do not the Sadducees and the Pharisees do the same? He's calling his followers to a deeper love. And he concludes his gospel today with the phrase, be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now that's a very familiar phrase. I'm sure we've all heard it before. And what do you hear when Jesus tells you to be perfect? If you're anything like me, then you'll think, well, that's impossible. I'm only human. What does Jesus mean, be perfect? He must be thinking symbolically or something, or maybe we become perfect after we die and we're in heaven. And this phrase, be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect, is actually situated in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. This is the middle of his lesson, of his teaching. And in many ways, it kind of serves as the core of what it means to be a Christian, is to be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. But Jesus is not saying that we need to become like these robots that do everything perfectly, that we can never make a mistake again. He's not calling us to be superhuman or to become angels. But rather, when Jesus is calling us to be perfect, just as our Heavenly Father is perfect, what he's really inviting us to be is to be fully human. To be fully human, to be fully ourselves. Because in the great plan that God has for us, when God made us, he didn't make us as mistakes. When God made us, he made us as sons and daughters with a particular plan in mind, but he made us to be in heaven. He made us to be saints. God made us to be perfect. And by perfect, he doesn't mean something else, but to be perfect means to be fully ourselves. To be fully who God made us to be. And part of that is the flaws and the foibles of human nature, but to be perfect means to follow God as ourselves, fully human. When Jesus comes and takes on the form of when Jesus is born in Nazareth, he becomes fully human, and he shows us what it means to be human. To be human means to eat and to sleep and to love and to suffer and to share and to laugh and to cry. All these things that Jesus embodies are what it means to be fully human. And so to be perfect means to follow in that footsteps. And the great irony of the gospel, by being fully human, by being fully ourselves, we become closer to God. We become closer to that image of God that he created for us. And this word perfect, it appears one other time in the Gospel of Matthew. It appears when the rich young man goes to Jesus and asks, what must I do, to inherit heaven? And Jesus says to go and sell your belongings and to go and give them to the poor and to follow Jesus, and then you will be perfect. It's this call of perfection, which is really a call to be fully human by what? By stripping himself of the material possessions that keep him from following Jesus, by listening to Jesus, following in his teaching, by caring for others. That's what it means to be fully human. And just as Jesus is calling us to be perfect, he's giving us the example. In the Sermon on the Mount, we see this kind of manifold way of following Jesus, that it requires prayer. It requires the absence of anxiety over material things. It requires an honestness of our state with God, not to be hypocrites, not to be self-righteous or selfish, but to be freely giving, to one sense to pour ourselves out for others. And this sermon is kind of the how-to for our moral lives, but also a deeper calling in our spiritual lives. And so as Jesus calls us to be perfect, he calls us to be more fully ourselves. And finally, I think it's helpful just to go into a little bit of the Greek. So the Greek word that Matthew uses for the word perfect is the word teleos, which is an adjective. And teleos means to be whole, to be complete, to be final or fully realized. So when Jesus is calling us to be perfect, he's calling us to be whole. He's calling us to be fully realized. He's calling for us to integrate the different parts of our life so that we act as one, that we're not immature, we're not doing things selfishly, but we're whole, mature, able to follow Jesus with an integrity of heart. And that's what God is calling us to. But don't worry, if you haven't reached it yet, God continues to help us in this endeavor. That every time we come to God in prayer, every time we go to confession, every time we come to Mass, we are, I think, getting closer and closer to being more fully ourselves. That when we strip away the sins, when we strip away the temptations, when we strip away the things that keep us from God, who we discover is a person more fully ourselves, more fully who God meant us to be, and more fully full of joy and peace. So let us continue to follow after Jesus. Let us strive to listen to him, and let us not give up hope that one day we too may be perfect.